All right. So I do hear a lot of people out there saying things about if there's a flat rate is a big discussion right now, but I want to talk about standard repair times before I talk about flat rate. So standard repair times are there's a given amount of time to do a job in, right? And so when these times are given out, they're done by qualified technicians, usually out of frame. I'm talking about trucks. I'm always talking about trucks. And these times they come up with these times and then they issue them as a repair time that it should take. Even under warranty, these times are, from the best of my knowledge, and I've inquired, I've talked to warranty departments and sought the knowledge. These have always been times that qualified technicians have been able to make. So my issue is if these are times that qualified technicians take to do a job, and you are really, really a lot faster, then shouldn't your pay represent that in the way that you're paid, and not through flat rate, but through the hourly rate that you're paid? And if it was, I mean, that's a better measure for me, because the others, like, it's pixie dust, right? We know the customer's paying for money to the company, and the company is not having that as an expense to employ you. That's the overall wash of flat rate. And that's why it makes money for them. But essentially, what I see now is a lot of people trying to get technicians to collaborate with businesses so that they can bill a lot of hours that everyone knows in the shop, that is not being worked on the vehicle, because guys are so fast and proficient. And even at really high rates, this is happening, 150, and up. So I have my issue with saying half the door rate, which I've heard people say, and I don't disagree that a guy has a right to say it. Why doesn't he? It's his skill. You have a building. Now, does he come to you and ask you, hey, how do you fix this? Well, then maybe he doesn't have room to argue. It's the guy who is operating on his own as a subcontractor, guys, as someone who you call in to do your job of electrical or engines or whatever, and you don't have to go manage him. You don't have to go give him advice. He doesn't have to take time off the rest of the guys' tickets in the shop. He's his own man doing his own shit. He's tooled to do it, and he has the right to ask for quite a bit of that as far as billing out what it is that he billed out. But that's not how most guys see themselves in shops. They don't see themselves as private contractors or, like a subcontractor that is doing a job and should receive certain reward for that amount of expenditure. And it's not just expenditure in our day, but it's our body, it's our mind. We have a huge expenditure of our mind has to dedicated towards this part of the job and knowing these things to be at that skill level of knowledge. And then we got to go with every other expenditure. So there's plenty out there. And if we as mechanics are not asking for that, it's because either we're not empowered to do that, we don't feel like that's available to us, and this channel is kind of surrounded around empowering people to know your worth, or, you know, I really think it lies in that, because the equilibrium is if you know your worth, then you go in there and you ask for it, not depending on because no boss is going to give you money you don't ask for. They're just not going to do that, guys. No boss, you're going to wait and wait and wait and buy your time, and man, when's this going to happen? And talk shit at lunch. Instead, you know, there's different options, man. I worked for 8.5 hours every day when I was working for dealerships, and I didn't take a lunch. I never took a lunch because I figured I could bill out 8 hours. It gave me better odds to do that, and I was micromanaging tenths of an hour all the time. And that's the way that hustle has to be for them to pay you really well. It has to make sense for them. So if they're charging $250 an hour and they're paying you 48, to me that's not a good fair wash. If they're charging 250, at that point they can afford to pay you 75 bucks an hour. And there's no dealer that can tell me that doesn't work. And I understand that there's a lot of expenditures in having like $20,000 programming stations and these things, but a lot of the vendors provide them through contracts where they're the only people that can get them, and they buy the tooling at the cost to support the product that the vendor has inside the truck. So, what I'm getting at here is that they have to have these qualifications to operate, which makes their expenditure really high at a dealership. But now that the $100 hour is gone, and we're now double and a time and a half that. So where does that mean? Why should we, as the earner of that total dollar per hour with our box, our brain, our body, why should we accept anything less than a fair shake? That's what I'm getting into when I talk about owning your own business. And if you're skilled and qualified to go on your own, maybe as a diagnostician, automotive electrician, performance, diagnostics, that kind of thing. Those are huge facets of the trade that aren't capitalized by individuals. There are a lot of do-it-yourself kind of handyman out there doing a lot of repairs, making hoses for people who, the 6NZ where the return line chafed. You know, there's a guy who comes out and he fixes one of those, the loaf and jug here locally, and he makes pretty good money every year, charging a lot on hose repair. And there's that. But when you're going to go into diagnosing people's engines, you can do more damage than you can benefit if you don't know what you're doing very easily. Same thing with wiring. These ECUs cost thousands and thousands of dollars. That's a Motorola, CM, Cummins Motorola ECM will be how much? Anywhere from 900 on a vehicle all the way up to 3,000 on class 4 through 8. And then you got core costs, $600 to $1,500 core costs. And they're not cheap. And they have to be programmed by somebody who has factory access to servers. That's another cost incurred through the back the service department. So like these things are not just easy to, he burnt my ECU. He pulled his power probe and shorted out my 5 volts. How did he short it out? Because he applied 12 volts to a 12 volt pin, but he didn't know in the harness, because he was willy-nilly, that it was tied to the 5 volt reference, and he burnt to everything, sensors, everything. I put sensors up here on the board, dialed up 6 volts on my volt, and shorted the sensor directly. And I knew why it happened, and it was my fault, but that thing's pretty touchy. My point is, if you go in there with a power probe and you're starting to just hope and pray, that you're not a diagnostician, and you're probably not at a dealership mastering your trade with a power probe. All right? Picoscopes, I'm only going to mention them at once, not because I have an issue, because I think it's a great idea if you're an automotive tech, but this is a diesel channel. So we want to do things that are wireless, that we have to, there's an electronic ear that dealerships pay thousands and thousands of dollars to have, like $20,000. And then they send a mechanic to a week-long course on how to use this device. It's an electronic ear. It's essentially, it's the same thing that I showed you guys the other day in this little kit here, and you can watch the video for diagnosing noises. But if you switch from channel to channel, you can spread over this huge, vast. Can you imagine doing that with wires? That's not even feasible. Even on a dyno, it's dangerous, and I don't know that it would be very informative at all with a big diesel, as much noise as they make. When the fan kicks on, it's going to probably drown out a lot of things. When you're looking at noises, use noises. I mean, use a device. There are devices, the one I was telling you about just now, that for 20 grand, you can punch in the year, make, model, and it'll tell you exactly the kind of metal that is harmonizing. It knows every single frequency of everything. They're really expensive, but if you do drivability and performance, where all you do is diagnose noises and drivability issues, where, or suspension, steering suspension, that would be a very valuable tool for your shop to have. They're very expensive, and they're not like, they take a lot to understand how to operate. On a small scale, you can have something like this, and this will diagnose every noise you have. So I saw a guy using a picoscope to diagnose a wheel bearing, or someone had told me that they used it for fuel inlet and fuel. I have used that on fuel. Just clip it onto the fuel lines. You can tell which one's louder. But it's hands-free. So I can go in the cab. I can operate the engine through the ranges. And I don't have to worry about, how is my test going to operate on the open road when I can only simulate this on the open road? So that's why we go into this multimeter that I showed you the other day, where I can take the face off. And I talk about it a lot because this allows you access to the open road to diagnose through the ranges where you're looking at signal voltages. And if you can bounce that off a computer, you can know that at max load, I can look at on the engine right there under the pit, it says engine percent load, calculated engine load, any of these things, engine load. We want to see that 95% engine load or better, 80, 90, somewhere around there. But we want to make sure that we're second to high if we're running a semi, almost direct. And we want to look at the signal voltages, and you'll find, oh shit, that's where the boost sensor, it only ever reads 27. It failed in range. It can't actually read 30. So you never get fueling for 30, and all of a sudden you start to feel low power, and you got people rummaging through your engine trying to figure out what's the problem. But you have to diagnose the modern electronic engine this way. So that's why a dyno would be a really beneficial tool. The problem with the dyno, I'll just tell you up front, I did the research, I worked with a lot of people, and the dyno is expensive because it doesn't really pay for itself. It does if you're doing repairs off of it, but not if you're doing like other things. So if you're just going to have one to test people's horsepower, it's going to wear out so fast that it's not going to make sense to have that semi-truck dyno for 80, 100 grand or maybe even more. I think a dynamometer is the best tool ever, and there's only so many across the country. So if some of you diesel shops thinks, hey, there's an investment to be made here. Especially if you're building engines, guys, if you build an engine, and I worked for Freightliner and ran a dyno, I dynoed engines that other people had built from other dealers and brought to us. There's also dynos that I did on engines that I did. I dynoed everything that you don't know it until you prove it, right? So you hand it back to a customer, but you haven't ran that thing at max load. So that means you shouldn't be building engines, or you should be paying for their dyno after you're done, so you can put your seal on it and say dyno proven. That's all I do is dyno proven shit, because I don't want you stuck on the side of a pass where you're gonna die because of the cold, or whatever the extreme situation I put you in, because your truck broke down because you threw a rod and it really started to knock when you started to pull a load. What were you supposed to do? You had to pull it, so you went to the top and boom. That's it. You got a breather. So what I'm trying to get at here is the level of quality that we provide for these people has to be commensurate with what they're going to expect at these dealers. So talked about this. The time and materials jobs are jobs where electrical jobs are jobs where you have to troubleshoot through processes that you cannot skip. So a time and materials job, for an example, would be, and another one would be an installation job. So if a customer came and said, I need air flaps on this belly dump, and I want the switch in the cab, and I want them marked what they are, and what is that going to charge me? You're going to tell them, listen, on every different vehicle it's going to be different. I can give you a rough estimate, but really this is a time and materials job. So you pay for the materials, and it takes the time it takes me. Now, when I'm done, obviously I'm going to stand behind that product, because it might have taken longer than it would have taken the next guy. But they know when they pay me for time and materials, they're getting good workmanship. They're providing good materials at my advice, right? I'm telling them, don't buy those. Those are shit. Those will corrode in a week. Buy these. We don't scotch lock anything. I've never scotch locked a thing in my life. If you're scotch locking anything, you don't need to be on the road trying to help people, because you're going to make problems for the next season. Mag chloride actually soaks into the field that is generated in any kind of exposure, meaning the insulator, when it's damaged, that free-flowing electrons actually soak in corrosion. So you poke something one time, and it goes through a cold season where they use that stuff on the road, and it's a wrap. And you won't find it. It'll eat the whole wire out, but you won't find it until you're starting doing what? Voltage applied, voltage drop tests. So the time materials jobs are the money jobs. Not everyone gets these jobs inside of dealerships because of people like the milkmen who take too much time, and people who don't know what the hell they're doing that are going to bury a job. So keep in mind that if you're in this top 10% of people who are doing these kinds of jobs, you should probably be doing these kinds of jobs on your own, because you don't need a dealer to support you to be able to put the time, and the materials are being provided by the person. So it makes good sense to do it for them at a rate that's anywhere, close to 75 to 150 bucks an hour. I would not go to 150 unless I had a huge expense in the gear that I had to purchase to go out in business. But that's where I tell you guys, if you want to do this, you have to do it on the lean. Start out as lean as possible, trim all the fat off your business, all the things that aren't making profit, and then recalculate to, hey, if I'm going to buy all this software, I can't go and do brakes. Not because I'm too good to do brakes, but because if I'm not doing engines, I'm not paying for my software. So, and the same thing with every other tool, you have to think, am I going to get the use out of this that it takes, or is this an expense I don't need right now? If I have a clear goal in mind of what kind of work I want to be doing on my own. And then if you want to be doing steering and suspension, start putting away money towards a lift. You don't have to assemble it. You can put it in a shed, put it in a storage unit. But then when you decide, hey, I've had enough. This dude keeps punking me every day. I'm going to erect that lift, and I'm going to get after it on my own. And you watch. You'll make a shitload more than you ever thought before. But don't do it in an uncalculated way, because you won't. If I had a dyno, I could have killed it all over. I could have done my region completely. But, I mean, I don't. I have 9 kids. So we make choices in life, and I think that I'm not a poor man because I have the things I need, and I want to help others to have the things that they need. And I realize that information really is the thing that keeps a lot of guys from going to business on their own. Imagine, though, a rapport that truckers established who own a lot of their own shops, places to put their trucks, that if we helped them, if we brokered some kind of rapport with them that allowed for us to work directly for them in their own shops under whatever umbrella of insurance or however we could work that out. Imagine that rapport. We could give, a discount to the people they send to us. There's a lot of labor that could come from that would benefit both people, and the cost expenditure of the $250 hour versus my $75 or $100 hour is a whole lot easier on them to continue to do business. Big corporations have taken over most things, guys. And owner operators in California, when they came out with the DPFs and they mandated a retrofit of all the trucks that were on the road, they were $8,000 to $11,000, some up to $16,000 to retrofit some vehicles. So they made the particulate requirements, right, for the EPA, for California Air Resources Board. But in doing so, they put 60% of owner-operators out of business that year. I worked for Peterbilt at the time, and they were doing grants through our warranty department, had a grant contingency that allowed for them to be retrofitted with CleAir and other devices that were available at the time as an add-on device. But that was only to meet particulate requirements, not NOx or crankcase vapor. All those other things were down the road. So when the EPA went out and they said, hey, I want particulate managed, they also didn't give schooling to everyone across the country, even if you went to a Cummins school. They had a special class you had to go to if you were a Cummins technician who worked in Sacramento or in California because of their air resources. Well, now several other states are adopting these, but they're not, the training isn't as widespread as it could. So if you get good at after treatment, a guy mentioned that today, electrical, you find that you can do this diagnostic work inside of a dealership, make a lot of money. It will require probably a lot more tools because they're going to expect you to repair what it is you find. You can do diagnostics for other people where I can tell them, hey, I showed up, it's the sensor. I can get one for you. I'm not going to charge parts because I don't get into the parts realm. That's another way to run a successful business. Don't get into the parts realm. I'm getting kind of long-winded now, but these are all pearls of wisdom, man, from many years. So if I'm not getting into parts and they're providing their parts and I'm just telling them, hey, you can change this sensor and do it on your own, they're not going to call, have me do that. That's added money. The more money I can save them, the more viable I am as a lifeline to them. And as a lifeline, maybe at $100, I'm a lifeline. I mean, I've gone out and taken engines and found burnt contacts just under the injector contact on a C15, the hold downs, the little nuts right there. And it was literally shorting out that injector. But if you would have gone to a dealer, they would have pulled the injector. They would have checked it. You need a harness. He didn't need all that. All right. There was one of those contacts were burnt. I applied voltage, checked it, made sure it was good, and then went about his merry way after the contacts were clean. It was loose. I retightened it, ran the same injector solenoid test, and it was good to go. I saved that man thousands and thousands of dollars. And he calls me when he has problems with his truck, infallibly. Okay, so if you're going to do this on your own, those are just a few Q tips, and I hope that you're willing to stick around for the 17 minutes this took. All right, have a good night, guys.